Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media. UMD Media's weekly show, Tech Funnel, aka the Home Tunnel, starts now. Those who are following us on YouTube and Facebook, please share, subscribe, like, so that we reach to many more. And the H panel starts now. Great. Welcome again. Today, as usual, it's a great pleasure for me to have Yusuf Gabhewat and Professor Esgail Gabisa in the panel. We have Regret from Faisal Robla today. He will hopefully join us next week. Gentlemen, welcome. Today we have a topic, Tigray Defense Forces, withdrawal or pushed back. Now what? What's next? So as usual, we'll start with what stood out for each one of you during the past week. Professor Eskel, you will cover some of the developments there. Maybe we start with Joseph. Joseph, what stood out for you today, the last week?
What stood out for me was the visit of Jeffrey Feltman, the special envoy for the Horn of Africa, to UAE, Turkey, and Egypt. I believe it's symptomatic of a superpower not knowing exactly what it wants to achieve in this crisis. As I said before, the US is trying to strike a middle where there is no middle at all. On the one hand, as we have seen recently, it's trying to save Abiy under the mission of unity and stability of Ethiopia. And on the other hand, it's also concerned about the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. It wants to avoid another Rwanda. But the question is, how do you balance between these two? How do you achieve these two savings? You cannot save the victims of a genocide by saving the genocidal regime itself. So that confusion have led to a lot of other confusions because it's trying to find a balance that doesn't exist in reality. For example, the recent one that we have seen is as the TDF got closer and closer to Addis Ababa, the US shown its panic in a very frantic way, and that has been taken as a green light for the rogue nations like UAE and Turkey, who has been waiting on the sidelines to intervene massively. Now, when the TDF is pushed, I have a feeling that the US, if not happy, it was comfortable with it. The fact that it has been pushed away from the gates of Addis Ababa was to the US. It has avoided a catastrophe for Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, that's how it saw it. But at the same time, now we are seeing him going to Turkey and UAE, probably telling them that the green light is off and the red light is back. Again, I'm not sure exactly what he's achieving, what he's trying to do from them, but most probably he's going to ask them to curb or slow down or even halt their arms supply to Ethiopia. But again, we also see when he goes to Egypt, what he's trying to do is he's working with that balance. When he goes to Egypt also, he's trying to tell Egypt that if and when the TDF reaches the border of Sudan, not to arm the TDF. At the same time, this is a message to the TDF. Do not even think about it. Do not even think about reaching the borders of Sudan. This is probably a great change within the U.S. policy because if you remember, when in fact, it used to insist that the Amhara forces, the Eritrean forces, and the Ethiopian forces should get out of Western Tigray. Now it seems to adapt to a different kind of scenario where the encirclement of Tigray is necessary to pressure Tigray to some kind of concessions. I don't know exactly what they are trying to achieve, but I have a feeling that part of the uh, demands of the US will be to recognize the Abiy government as a legitimate one, and at the same time for to pressure uh, uh, Tigray to remain part of Ethiopia, not secede of Ethiopia. But eventually, it seems that the encirclement of Tigray, to find the encirclement of Tigray as a necessary point of pressure, to get what it wants from Tigray, more or less seems like the same kind of strategy that the Abiy government is using. He's doing the same thing, but for a different purpose, of course. Sorry, I went on and on for this one. So
Okay, thanks, Yosef. Professor Skel, you can comment on that as well, but what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
I mean, there isn't. I mean, because the sudden withdrawal of the Tigray Defense Forces from the about 200 kilometers from Addis Ababa, and the changing narrative is the dominant story. So I cannot say that something else other than what you selected for discussion stood out for me. But to put it in my own my own interpretation on what is happening is, for me, it is basically the continuing drama of the civil war, the latest twists and turns in this horrendous saga that Ethiopians and Ethiopia, and for now, I am including Tigrayans in there, that the country is going through. There is the obvious withdrawal of Tigray Defense Forces from northern Shawa, from some of the areas that they had captured in southern Wallo, almost retreating to an area that they feel comfortable to hold as a defensive position in the areas of Mersa and Waldea. So that's a significant gain for the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and their allied Amhara forces. But the way these events, this is a fact that has happened, the way they are interpreted by both sides contrasts. On the TDF side, the interpretation is, of course, it's a tactical adjustment, is what they said. Nothing changed in terms of the strategic goal of the Tigray Defense Forces. And that strategic goal is to make sure that Tigray is not subjected to genocide once more. That they're going to make sure that they've broken out of the siege and ensured that Tigray remains defended. That is the strategic goal, and there's nothing changed as far as the Tigray government or the Tigray Defense Forces are concerned. The spokesperson is concerned. That strategic goal has not changed. Absolutely nothing changed in that respect, but they have made tactical adjustments. So in light of the use of the more use of the drones, especially the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drone, armed with smart weapons, smart bombs. Not many; they carry only 2, but they're accurate. They are slow moving. They can stay in the air for a substantial amount of time. They don't have a great range, but they are accurate. Because they are accurate, they could hit assets of the Tigray Defense Forces. They could hit artillery units, pieces, and other moving targets. So they're accurate, and in light of that increased use in the area of northern Shawa, and of course about 12 divisions is the report that I have, about 12 divisions of recruits, new recruits in the Ethiopian National Defense Forces that were brought through Afar, the danger to the Tigray Defense Forces is clear. A tactical withdrawal is necessary from a military standpoint. Um, but of course, it's a recent gain. We were talking about Dese and Cambodia, that they were their strategic um, spots in this war, so might really turn the balance of power in favor of the Tigray Defense Forces. But to lose that, of course, will have some kind of impact. And the drones have also had some had impact in terms of losses for the Tigray Defense Forces. So for now, from the Tigrayan side, the rapid advance from Addis Ababa has has been halted. They're now focusing on the preserving the powers, the forces, and the firepower that they have. If the Ethiopian National Defense Forces want to engage the Tigray Defense Forces, they have to bring them to the areas where the Tigray Defense Forces want to fight them. That's the, the story, the narrative on the Tigray side. On the Ethiopian government side, of course, the report is that there was a total rout, complete annihilation of the Tigray Defense Forces, and the victory is a glorious victory on par with Adwa. And the man that led the effort is Menelik III. That's the story that is coming out of Ethiopia. There is no mention of the heavy casualties that they suffered south of Dese. Probably about 10,000, even more new recruits were killed. There is no talk about the economic impact of the war on the Ethiopian economy. We can talk that at some length, but it is a complete rout of the Tigray Defense Forces. Ethiopia is triumphant. The king is on his throne. Now Ethiopia is going to return to development. Ethiopia is going to turn to national discussion. But the story that Ethiopia really won against the superpowers is a reversal of roles. The reversal of roles in terms of the story. This story should have been told by the Tigray Defense Forces, who were up against, obviously, the Turkish power, Iranian power, and more importantly, Chinese power and the UAE. If the Tigray Defense Forces were complaining about fighting against other powers, it would have made sense. That includes Eritrea as well. But it is the Ethiopians that are actually saying that they won given an ignominious defeat to Tigray, as if tomorrow, as if a month from now, that another story might not emerge. But in general, this reversal of roles was quite interesting. Second, I think this war has entered a new stage, but it is unsustainable for the Ethiopian side for reasons I might want to talk some other time. But it is also going to have, the third point is going to have some political repercussions within the body politic in Ethiopia. That's the story, the story of the withdrawal and the competing interpretations, and it's the consequences of the war stands out for me.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that will give us a segue to our topic. But you mentioned about how the Ethiopian government is framing it in terms of fighting a broader war than the TDF. I think this is time to play what General Bacha mentioned about Ethiopia is fighting against its historical enemy, the West. This is what he said just this week. Again, I seem to have an audio issue. I apologize for that. He's basically saying the war is with the Western world or behind the Wayane or the TDF. Maybe the first question on the withdrawal or not. Uh, there is a mention of again Bacha mentioning about not only pushing all the way to where the TDF is right now, but taking them to all the way. He was actually specifically mentioning he would announce about the ultimate victory from Magala. So this is from the party affiliated Walter information.com, walterinfo.com. General Bacha saying the greatest victory news would be um, told or will be announced, will be heralded from Magala. So maybe the first question to you, Boz, is do you see the NDF and allied forces going all the way to Magala or to Tigray? Or do you see this as an opportunity for a peaceful talk? Because there is a section of analysis saying why Feltman is in the Middle East is maybe for the same reason. Now the TDF is far from Addis Ababa. They might see an opportunity for starting a peace talk. Professor Skel, you might start there.
I don't think what Bachadabale says holds any water, and I don't think anybody should. He is back. He's back. He's been absent for some time, but he's back. So he's given to hyperbole. He's a trumpetista of the government, but I don't think it is connected with war strategy, which I don't think the Ethiopian government has, and it's not connected with a political strategy as well. He just says it at a spur of a moment. So there is really nothing to what Bacha Sebele is talking about. But I cannot fail to imagine that there is some talk going on at this moment in time. I could see the frantic diplomatic shuttle that the American special envoy had done. I don't think he's not doing nothing. He's doing something. And if you connect that with how the war, the withdrawal went on, and how Ethiopia presented, I think this is a calculated withdrawal, or maybe by encouragement of the United States to give Abiy to save face for Abiy Ahmed. If he were negotiating or calling for peace talks last week, when Tigray Defense Forces and their allies were about to overrun Addis Ababa, he would be in a weaker position to enter into negotiations. Right now, to say that there is really no connection within the Tigray Defense Forces withdrawal, that is a mere coincidence, belies the mind. I don't think that's the case. He has now the victory. You could say that he has routed the Tigray Defense Forces. He has saved Ethiopia from extinction. Now he can say that he could be generous enough to start talks. I think that was orchestrated, as far as I'm concerned, so that he has now his face saved in a stronger position to enter into negotiations with the Tigray government. This idea that they're going to march on Mekelle is simply meant for the consumption of their supporters in Addis and for continued recruitment. If they are not going to negotiate, I think Ethiopia in the long run is going to suffer economically and even militarily. And the reason that I say this is that this is a drone's victory. The victory, if there is any victory from the air, it is only the drone's victory. They cannot sustain that. The drones cost about, I don't know, 25 million. Uh, it, uh, it, it it requires about 3,700 to keep it in the air for an hour, and the smart bombs that were effective are to the tune of 50, 60, $70,000, which Ethiopia doesn't have, unless China or the UAE or Turkey provide them in the form of assistance or in the form of economic aid or maybe for strategic purposes for themselves. The Ethiopian government cannot sustain the drone-led war at all. Wars are not won from the air. They're always won on the ground. And the Tigray Defense Forces, even as they were withdrawing, were dealing devastating blows to the Ethiopian army on the ground. So there must be something in the works. The shuttle that Feltman is going through Cairo, Ankara, and Dubai, it has something to do with ending this war military through negotiations. They have to do that. The American government has to do that. They have their hands full with Russia and Ukraine, and they have their hands full with China threatening to take over Taiwan. So they need to focus there. So it's not the American government right now focusing on Ethiopia. It is really at the level of the State Department at the most, or the envoy. So something is going on, I suspect.
Mm. Thank you. Yosef, you will comment on that and on the same question. Before that, to the point of there is something going on, I think Feltman was caught by the media when he left Addis 2 weeks ago. Sunday will be his, I think, second week. He mentioned that there was a massive progress made in the peace talks. That's the same day Abiy announced that he will go to the battlefront. So when you connect the dots for me as well, it makes sense that this, fast withdrawal and he going himself, going to the battlefront, there was a kind of choreographed, story that was in the making. And you remember he went to UAE when he made the first trip to the Horn of Africa as an envoy as well. So that came after his visit came the UAE's withdrawal from Assab port and so on. So I'm seeing the same kind of repetition there. But Yosef, you can comment on that as well, on the first question of what is unfolding in terms of, is it marching to Tigray for the NDF and its allied forces, or is it they will stop there and go for the peace talks?
Uh, I'm caught. I don't see the Ethiopian forces all the way marching to Mekelle. That is, as the Professor Scale has said, it's Baja speaking. So that's not the issue. To me, the problem is here. Why did the TDF retreat all the way from Debre Berhan all the way to where it is now, somewhere toward in Mersa, in the area of Weldia and Mersa? Why did it retreat? To believe that somehow there is some kind of work behind it, is to say that somewhat the TPF didn't know exactly what it was doing while it was marching to Debre Berhan. If there was any agreement between the Ethiopian forces and the Americans, and it was the withdrawal was orchestrated, we have to believe nothing happened before that. To me, let me state why I feel, why did they retreat? There has been a serious setback. One, of course, is the drones. The drones had Not only they were attack drones, they were also reconnaissance drones. And some people were complaining that the TDF has been thinly outstretched all the way from Mekelle to Debre Berhan. And the drones were do with the long distance, it's easier for them to detect any kind of heavy weapons, trucks, uh, tanks, the zoo, mortars, and all of that kind of stuff, because the distance is very long. Now, that is on the drone side. What happened also on the military side is one of them was what Dr. Hizkiel has said. There were 12 divisions attacking fiercely on the Mille front. The other one was probably, to me, more lethal and more critical was the fall of Gashena on the Western Front. If you remember, Gashena, this was the second time. I believe that there was some kind of intelligence failure on the TDF side, because this is the second time that's happening on the Gashena front. Before, if you remember, when the TDF reached Debre Tabor, about 35 to 40,000 Ethiopian troops came through Wegeltena, Kon, and entered Gashena. And that caused the entire forces, the TDF forces from all the way from Falakit to Debre Tabor to withdraw again. Now, the same thing happened again at this time, but on the flip side of it. Now, this time, the Ethiopian forces, the Ethiopian and Amhara forces were coming from the western part of Tigray. And there was always a problem in that triangle. That triangle is the Falakit, Gergera, and Debre Zabit triangle. I have always wondered, I have mentioned that with Teddy Press, because they were too close. That triangle was too close to Gashena. And the TDF forces were working on a very small margin of error, a very thin margin of error on that side. I have no idea why they haven't pushed them before towards the Berzabit and Chachoho. Now, that failure has caused a massive collapse on many fronts. For example, Lalibela couldn't fall without Gashena. Now they are fighting in Kon, trying to enter what do you call the Wegeltena. And on the other hand, they have passed Gashena and they are now to Kumsk, the area of Kumsk, which is very much closer to Waldia. All those things happened because of the capture of Gashena. So in a sense, what I am saying is that it couldn't be simply by agreement, such kind of a retreat, although in many areas the retreat was, as the TDF claims, on its own volition, but it was triggered by these two attacks, one on the east and one on the west, one on the Gashena front and one on the eastern front, on the Mille front. If that is the case, then it would be difficult to imagine a kind of retreat, that there is some kind of a peace deal behind it, unless that thing came after the fact, unless the attack was necessary to convince the TDF to withdraw all the way to Tigray or to whatever it is, or to the places that it is now. So to me, that's why I'm very skeptical on the idea of that there is some kind of agreement behind this withdrawal. But there is another two things, let me mention them, why the retreat also was necessary. One was, of course, the military one. The other one was the increasing hostility of the Amhara population in the captured areas. Whenever TDF moved into a certain area, the same way was in Tigray, immediately the Abiy government, what the Abiy government does, it cuts all the services in that area. Electricity is the first one that goes out, and with that, almost all the economic activity of that area comes to a halt. Even water services becomes difficult. The banking stops, of course. The hospital stop functioning because there is no medicine, and as a result of that, there was a growing resentment among the Amhara residents in the captured area. Not only that, we have also to understand that the TDF depends on lodging for its lodging and some extent also its food on the local population. That also has led to an increasing resentment. In addition to all of that, there is this collateral damage of the war. So for Tigrayans, for in Tigray, they could say this is the sacrifice that they are willing to pay in order to liberate themselves. It could also be the case in certain areas like the Ago areas and the Oromia in the Amhara areas. But it's very hard to convince the Amhara residents in a certain area that it is for their cause. So there is this increasing resentment. Even in some instances, there are Fanos working within that areas, So it has become harder and harder to maintain that area. I don't think it has inflicted a lot of damage on the TDF, but it has been psychologically, it has been exhausting. For example, if there is if somebody fires a gun from certain area, what the TDF soldiers would do is go to house and house, search for arms in that area. So that kind of psychological warfare has also been going on in that area. So to me, that also has a part, But to me, the greatest things are two. The realization, for example, we talked about the drone. The realization by the Tigray leadership was more than the drones is the fact that the West, as the world, the powers to be, will do their best for Tigray, for the TDF, not to enter Addis Ababa. That realization has more to do than the fact of
Is it only for me, Yosef? You are breaking.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I think you are back now. Maybe you finish that point. Yeah, you are still breaking. Okay, we move on. Maybe Professor Ezekiel, you were mentioning about the drones, and this is Al Jazeera. That first, I think, a serious report that came out from Al Jazeera. Before and after that, I don't think that drones got the attention they deserve. So
yeah, just in the past 2 months alone, the UAE. Well, we begin with breaking news from Ethiopia. Al Jazeera has obtained satellite images that show the United Arab Emirates is providing military support to the Ethiopian army. And the report reveals that a total of 90 flights have flown between the UAE and Ethiopia just in the past 2 months alone. The UAE has hired 2 companies from Europe to run military support flights to Ethiopia, and the same Ukrainian firm was used by the UAE to supply arms to Libya's warlord, Khalifa Haftar. Let's take a closer look.
This is the largest airbase in Ethiopia. The
I think there is a lot about drones in this report. Yosef, maybe you are back now. So if you finish your point, then I'll move to Professor Ezekiel.
Okay, let me make it brief. I am talking about 2 realizations that dawned on the leadership of Tigray. The first realization is that even if they make all the way to the gates of Addis Ababa, that the powers to be are determined not to let the TDF forces march to Addis Ababa. That realization has more power than the fact of the drones themselves. Had it not been drones, it could have been something else. So far as they are determined not to let the TDF forces enter into Addis Ababa, because they have created this narrative that says if the TDF force march into Addis Ababa, Addis Ababa will implode, the entire region will be on fire, millions of refugees will go to Europe, and therefore it has become a no-no for the TDF forces. That realization has set in, especially with the US, having the green light, for as I said before, with them. The other realization is that even though the narrative that the TDF talks about is it tries to make a distinction between the people of Amhara and their leadership or their elite, it has become it's not anymore clear where the difference lies. The hate factor, you see it in the leadership, you are seeing it also on the streets. So to them, these two realizations have sunk in, and they have had, to me, they must have had, there are two factors among many probably that have made them change their minds in regard to how to face this entire crisis militarily.
One thing maybe on your last point, there was a report today, I guess, or yesterday from Lalibela, where a priest was mentioning how during the experience of blackout, communication blackout from Lalibela, how he felt, bad for the people of Tigray who had to endure this long communication blackout and so on. So I see actually, when you see the elite and the political leadership from Bahar Dar compared to the people in the street, I mean, counting the propaganda, all that, and so on. So there is a significant difference. Maybe one thing that the kind of moving to Professor Skel's comment is, this is from France 24. This is from today. What caught my attention was a mention. They were talking to Lefort. The historian who has been following, I think, closely TDF, TPLF, and the Horn of Africa, where he mentioned the number one doctrine of the TPLF is to never engage in a fight one cannot win. And he's saying that they are following the same strategy they have always done, and even comparing to 2021 with 1991. So is it something that can explain? I think you both mentioned partly the withdrawal, the pushback, or whatever we can call it. Does that partly explain that? But with that, Professor Rizkel, I want you to comment on what Abiy mentioned as part one. So he says, I'm back to office, finishing chapter one victoriously, and he mentions a number of things in this 1.5 page letter. How do you read that? How did you assess his reflection on what he calls chapter one of his campaign? We didn't know before he went there were different chapters, but he's mentioning about chapter one being done.
Okay. First, on the withdrawal, I mean, we can piece together information from here and there and then speculate about what might happen that could be the case. But based on some information that I have, the withdrawal was a military necessity for the most part. It's a military necessity because last week the Tigray Defense Force, the commanders, the political spokespersons, they were not talking about backing off from Addis. And from what I know, they had all the intention, carefully planned the plan of engagement to enter Addis. But it's a military necessity for the two reasons that I mentioned earlier. I think the impact of the Turkish TB2 drone is not anything that you could minimize. It was accurate, It was delivering smart bombs and hitting targets. Second, even if they had entered Addis Ababa, even if the TDF had taken over Addis Ababa, they would face political problems because the popular consciousness in Addis Ababa is that Ethiopia would not accept the second coming of Tigray. That's one, the political difficulty in Addis, because the rest of their allies were not as effective as they were. The political cover was problematic. Second, if they were cut off, that is, if the Ethiopian National Defense Forces that had been assembled in the Afar region, if they were able to move west on from Samara to Chifra, and then to Bati and all that, and then cut them off, the Tigrayan forces would be cut off from their base, the Tigray to the south of Dese, and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and their allied forces would have taken them in parts, and defeated them, just like they did when the Tigrayan Defense Forces, under the assumption that, and that's how they were operating when they were moving west from Gashana west to capture Debre Tabor. They were going to Wereta, capture that junction, then capture Gondar and Bahar Dar. And the assumption was that if you cut the Ethiopian government in Addis from its major supply or supporter in the Amhara region, it would fall, was the political assumption. That, as Joseph was saying, was realized when the Ethiopian National Defense Forces assembled the remnants of the forces that were chased out of Tigray and northern Wallo, were reassembled, regrouped in Dese, and they were sending human waves to the Tigray Defense Forces. The Tigray Defense Forces were mowing wave after wave after wave, but then they realized that they cannot continue to simply kill people. So they decided that they must go for the machine that was creating those waves in Dese and Waldia. They did that. But in the first assumption, when they were moving west, the Ethiopian Defense Forces could have cut them from Gashana all the way to Lalibela and Sekota, and then take them in parts and attack them from the west as well. So that was a military necessity that they learned once. And now if they had cut them from the west side with 12 divisions, for God's sakes, and the Amhara forces, by the way, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces did not enter Gashana when it fell. It was the Amhara Fano that simply walked in. So it was a military necessity for this reason. The goal of the TDF and the Tigray government is to make sure that Tigray did not fall again, that the Tigray people must be protected at any rate. The reason for building the Tigray Defense Forces to the tune of 250 to 300,000 armed men, or men and women under arms, the reason is to protect Tigray. But if you lose your muscle, you will lose the entire goal. So it was a military necessity. And returning to, here is what the spokesperson is saying, that our goal of protecting Tigray and the people of Tigray is of paramount importance. And that they're not really lying about that. They're not hyping about that. They're not playing with words about that. That is why the reason for the existence of the Tigray Defense Forces. So to lose them in Northern Shawa, to lose as many forces in Northern Shawa is unacceptable. So withdrawing was basically a military necessity. Of course, the issue that there was occupation forces in many Amhara regions was unsustainable. And of course, it's not because of the maladministration of the Tigray Defense Forces, but the fact that sabotage, Abiy sabotage, was causing resentment is clear. But to the question that you just mentioned, This is the chapter one. When Abiy says this is chapter one, what he means by that does not mean chapter two is taking over Nagala. I think what he's talking about is necessitated by the division that this war had created within the Prosperity Party. That division is that the Amhara forces, the Amhara part of the Prosperity Party, the Amhara politicians were saying that why did Abiy return to Addis Ababa, to his office, without completely removing the Tigray Defense Forces from the entirety of the Amhara region? So there were complaints about his returning to Addis before he had completely liberated, as they say, liberated the Amhara region. That's one. Second, on the issue of the defeat that this ignominious defeat that he handed to, in their own parlance, that is, handed to the Tigray Defense Forces and Tigray leaders. The Amhara were saying, we were the ones that actually did the bulk of the work in liberating the Amhara region. Why is Abiy taking all of the credit himself? So there was a repercussion within the Amhara, within the Prosperity Party, from the Prosperity Party of the Amhara side, whereas on the other side, the Prosperity Party of the Oromo, that had been divided over this issue, coalesced behind Abiy. They came behind Abiy. So what he is saying is, this is really speaking to the Amhara Prosperity Party, saying, this is only chapter one. I'll go back and liberate all of Amhara. The Amhara Prosperity Party, the former ENDF, I think, or whatever that name is, the EHIDIN.
NDM, right?
NDM. Look, what they're saying is that if Tigray gets, Abiy gets into negotiations with Tigray, he might also demand that we vacate Western Tigray, Walqait. That they don't want to do. So there is a political repercussion within Addis Ababa, and that thing that you highlighted is actually addressing that issue. Is speaking to them, because there is some small upheaval within the party, at least complaints that he returned before completing the job. I don't think he's talking about a complete victory by taking over Mekelle. And that's the reason that I said I think some kind of negotiations is in the works. For the Tigray Defense Forces, the fact that they were created to defend Tigray and the people of Tigray, that weighs of paramount importance for Adkan. I know this. And I think René Lafort, he does speak to him, and he knows what he's talking about. So let's not be surprised. Let's not think that the Tigray Defense Forces are retreated forever. They will come back. They will come back. They're not going to back down from protecting and making sure that Tigray is not attacked brutally as it had last year.
I'm glad about what you mentioned in the highlighting, that highlighted text. It's good you talked about that, because it was highlighted by himself, by the office of the Prime Minister Abiy. I think, to your point, maybe he was making, if you don't read everything I'm saying here, just read this. This is for you. So that highlighting was from them. Yosef, you can reflect on that. But one thing that I want also, before we go to your final words for the show, there is a mention by, I think it is in the news, where he was meeting with his cabinet members, and they are talking about this new commission. If you follow closely, the government has been, Abiy Ahmed has been establishing commission after commission. Some of them we don't hear about them, where they are once they are established. But this is a new commission on national dialogue. So I think this is one of the first meetings he did after he came from the battle front. So this is the cabinet talking about Ethiopian National Dialogue Commission, and they were discussing about the draft proclamation on that. So you can speak to that as well. Is it something that was going on? He promised as the part of the election campaign, or does that have anything to do with negotiating with TDF, OLA, and so on? Joseph?
Okay. I probably wouldn't know. Most probably, since I am not buying into the idea that there is some kind of mechanism that's going on right now for this peace process in between the Abiy government and the TDF. I have no idea what he's talking about, so I will leave that to Professor Rizkel. But here is my point. I do believe that the Tigrayan forces have done an admirable job of withdrawing all the way from Debre Birhan. It's not. There's no theatrical part about it. I mean, there is no agreement that you withdraw from here, and therefore the Ethiopians will feel it as they go, and this would be this would give what do you call Abiy a face-saving phenomena. I don't believe that. I believe that they did withdraw because it was a military necessity, because they have seen they have some setbacks due to the drones and due to some military setbacks on the east and on the western front. But given all that, they have done their best, to withdraw in a very orderly manner. They have all the enemies that they have faced in between, they have destroyed them. So I'm all in agreement with Professor Hiskiel that all of this is done on how to protect Tigray. My problem is when I see all of this, the fighting that is going on, and the drawbacks and all of that, it cannot be made up. These things cannot be made up. They are reality on the ground. And given that, I don't see how, unless I'm saying, unless the Tigrayans have, unless the TDF have accepted this peace process after the withdrawal, to me it doesn't make sense. These two don't fit with one another. So as for the point that the Tigrayans will come back, I have no doubt about it. In fact, what I believe is, given the faults that we have mentioned, for example, there is the drone factor. How do you fight back the drone factor? How do you fight back, for example, the surveillance or the reconnaissance that the drones are giving? They keep seeing all kinds of movements of the TDF and making it very hard for the famous Qoroza to take place. How do they confront these things? One of the things that they have done is they are trying to organize themselves in a more compact way instead of in the outstretched part all over the Amhara. They are trying to confine themselves in a very compact area where they can defend themselves, where the movements will be quick and probably to some extent not detectable. And from that, probably they will also conduct a semi-guerrilla warfare on the Amhara areas. But anyway, this is the speculation. There are other speculations, for example, the fact that they have come back is probably they are going to the western part of Tigray. They will try to open the Sudanese border. That has been entertained by many others. There are others also that on the other extreme that are saying that that they are going back to their 78 kind of war, which means guerrilla warfare, which I don't buy, given that once they enter, once they let, I mean, the Tigrayan force cannot afford to fight a guerrilla warfare in their own land, given the genocidal nature of the war itself. So we see all kinds of scenarios in this. So for me, it's probably we'll have to wait and see, because now it's almost everything is fluid. Even as we speak about Mersa, there are still Tigray TDF forces in Wegaltena. You could imagine, how far it is in between Mersa and Wegaltena. So the whole picture is quite fluid right now, and we cannot exactly say where will it end. Probably the next week or 2 weeks, will give us a better picture of what the TDF is really thinking of how the fight will go on, because anything was at this point in time. I'm not questioning the wisdom of the TDF. All that I'm questioning is how is it going to be reorganized after these setbacks.
Great. I think that has been the nature of the H panel so far, that every week is different, with a lot of stories to talk about. So who knows, when we meet next week, it will be different. So gentlemen, thank you for your time. But before we sign off, final words, Professor Esquel?
I think on this, the national dialogue, I just wanted to say a couple of things, because I saw the draft law, the draft bill that was sent to the parliament. What it says is that there is misunderstanding. At least there were 4 points that caught my eye. There is misunderstanding among the elite. That's what the commission is trying to address. That is the misunderstanding. There is a misunderstanding, a political misunderstanding among the elite, and it's the elite that need to discuss and sort out their differences. That's one. Second, the government, Ethiopia needed a neutral and a capable government who could, a commission who could oversee this national dialogue, appointed by the government. Third, what they're saying is that the misunderstanding among the elite, so that the third goal is to stop the misunderstanding among the elite from percolating down to the society and create more misunderstanding between their government and the people and their government. That's what they are trying to resolve. And then this commission, after conducting discussions and dialogue and interviews and whatever for 2 years, that's the duration of the commission, they are going to write up a recommendation to the government to implement it. That's what the whole idea of the dialogue is, that it is framed as elite misunderstanding, and that it is at that level that they're going to discuss. So from the get-go, this is not a dialogue. This is not something that is going to include a real give and take between combatants, between political parties that have almost irreconcilable differences. It is not addressing the basic division that caused the war, about nation building in Ethiopia. What kind of nation is Ethiopia going to be? A unitary state in the Menelician mold that Abiy is trying to build, or is it going to be a federation of willing nations and nationalities? That is the fundamental contradiction that led to war, but they're not going to go there. So my last observation is that this war is going to go on indefinitely, because the Ethiopian government that is setting aside the genuine dialogue and just playing its games as it has been on many fronts. Right now, it has promised the unitarists, especially in the Amhara region, that the Constitution is going to be revamped, number one. Number two, the multinational federation is going to be restructured. And finally, it has also economic problems. So it has to pay its dues by changing the constitution and restructuring the the multinational federal system, and has to deal with this deepening economic crisis in the country. It will not be able to sustain this victory. So the war is going to go on. We'll see what happens next week. I don't think this peace process is going to work. It's a make believe, but the West is trying its best. So the war will continue for some time.
Okay, thank you, Professor Scale. Yosef, final word.
Okay. One of the things is, we have to know that financed mostly by Saudi Arabia and UAE. The involvement of this, what do you call them, regional powers, like UAE.
Again, you are breaking.
Okay, how about now?
You are good. Good.
Okay. I think that the war in Ethiopia is being financed by Saudi Arabia and UAE mainly. I have a suspicion that they are the ones who are paying the bills for to let's say Azerbaijan or Turkey or Ukraine. That's why I'm afraid that the war will go on, that the economic impact won't be that big on Ethiopia, at least, it will have its own consequences from the war itself, but not from financing it, because these regional forces, by the regional forces, I mean the forces that are in the Middle East, from Turkey, UAE, and others. But to me, anyway, the biggest thing about this evolving war is the internationalizing of this war. If you remember, Pompeo and Nadal and the three guys, who were complaining about when the TDF, when the Tigray Defense Forces fired rockets to Asmara. Remember the word that they used at that time? They accused it of internationalizing the war.
Yeah.
The paradox of it is now we are seeing the internationalization of the war. That has become probably one of the biggest problems to the TDF. In fact, I would like to close this one by saying that remember we talked with you privately. I remember with on the internationalizing of the war, and there is this the thing that you could use as metaphor. The very idea of for example, as take the B2, BT2, I'm TB2, sorry, drone made by Turkey. Its components, they go to Germany, UK, USA. The software is made in somewhere else. The camera is made in Germany, and so on and so forth. Now we could see a conveyor belt of death. You could almost call it a conveyor belt of death, making through its international journey, picking up, one component from here, another component from here. And now if you add the financiers, it stops in UAE and then goes on through Saudi Arabia and so forth. And then suddenly that drone is dropping its bomb somewhere in Tembian, in a poor peasant, So you see that the internationalization of genocide, even you can call it the internationalization of genocide, because this, years back, when genocide happens, you could almost contain the causes and whatever things that happen within that area only. But nowadays, in order to conduct a genocide in a certain area, you could have all these international elements added up to it. So I think the making of the drone through its various through division of labor through its various sources is a metaphor of what is happening today in our region. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good way to end this show today. And our topic today was Tigray Defense Forces, withdrawal or pushed back. And now what? So we have covered significantly what the panel thinks has happened and might happen in the coming week and more. Thank you very much for your time. Good night from here, and I hope to see you next week.
All right. Thank you. Mhm.
We have been following the weekly H panel on UMD Media. We were live on Facebook and YouTube. Those who haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. We broadcast in the English language, Amharic, Tigrinya. We tried once in Swedish as well, so more to come. I will see you in another show. Otherwise, with the H panel next week. H panel ends here.